So I'm going to just start off by asking you, Sean, if you wanted to pick up on anything that has come up today in the conversation in the panel. And I know you are what I would call a powerful soul who has achieved many great things in the short time that you've been on this planet and have probably accumulated a lot of experience as a result of that. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what's come up so far.
Like heart to many hearts.
Heart to many hearts, exactly.
Oh, well, I've just been dancing. I'm really hot. I'm under stage lights now. And dancing's pretty much my favourite thing in life, so I'm just attuning to this energy. But I think that probably ties in with a lot of the themes that have come up. And I think the panel discussion was introduced by this question about, for the panellists, what sort of moved them from sitting comfortably on the sofa to kind of being activists. And there's sort of an implication there that maybe it's like moving out of kind of some kind of selfishness into selflessness to some extent in their lives. And I wouldn't at all frame it that way myself. I think we've heard from Lindsay on the panel about pain of what's happening in the world and opening to that, and also I think me and Chris in the audience about the pain of what's happening in the world. And we heard from Paul on the panel about how when pain is overwhelming and you just can't deal with it, you tend to sort of shut it down and pretend it's about something else, or just find a way of avoiding it because it's overwhelming. It's kind of sensible in a way. And I very much feel the pain of what's happening in our world. So for me, activism wasn't about leaving comfort, it was about finding comfort. It was about facing that pain and actually engaging with it and knowing how to be in relation to that pain other than just looking away. And we heard a bit about courage earlier from Romina, and I think that's the courage that's needed. It's the courage to be fully alive, to be fully selfish, actually. We hear a lot about love and unity and connection and oneness, and I think if we really live, believe, embody that, then selfishness and selflessness become the same thing, because if we're all one, then your pain is my pain. So for me, it's the courage to be fully selfish, to be fully comfortable, that brought me into activism. But then the other real big theme that's come through, I think, has been what do we do? What do we do? And we heard about, Lindsay rightly saying, whatever we can contribute, we're all needed, and we are. And we heard Paul talking about whatever's necessary, and that's absolutely right as well. And we also heard about, well, what the hell can I do when China's, building new coal power stations by the dozen and pumping out enormous pollution and seemingly, and even without getting into that much detail, just the sense of I'm a person and this is an epic global problem. What on earth can I do about it? I'm just completely insignificant. And we, the two things that we're always told to do about it are change our personal lifestyles, which can feel totally insignificant, or lobby for political change, which can make you feel pretty insignificant when you ignore it. And I'll talk a bit more about some of the ways that I've responded to these kind of questions in my own personal life. But I think the biggest thing that came out for me in that is that we always, environmentalists talking to each other, always end up in the same argument, which is one person saying, look, there's no time for revolution, there's no time for radical change, everything's incredibly urgent, we have to deal with it with the frameworks we've got now and just get on with it. And the other side is saying, well, there's no point in that, if we do that, we're just addressing symptoms, we need to change things fundamentally and deal with the root causes. And you hear these conversations time and time again, and they go on, whether it's in a pub or in a formal debate, and it goes on for whole careers. And I think the reason that debate's never resolved, ever, is because you can argue completely convincingly that it's overwhelmingly urgent and there's no time. And you can also argue completely convincingly that we need radical fundamental change. So both sides are right. But neither side will generally admit that both sides are right, because then where does that leave us? If we need radical change, and there isn't time for radical change, where does that leave us?
Why don't we do both?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I'll come on to that for sure. But I think this is a question that, while there are doubtless people in this room who grapple with it, in society as a whole, we're sort of not meant to talk about this. You know, like, isn't this hopelessness? Isn't this despair? Like, we're not going to go there. We're going to say, come on, guys, let's do what we can do, and hopefully it'll all be all right. But we've been hearing about shutting down and not facing the pain and how destructive that is for us. So I think we need to ask these questions. We need to be allowed to talk about these questions, face them up, and ask, okay, if it is too late, and we're living in that world, then what do we do in that world? Because we're still alive. Even if we were into unstoppable runaway climate change, which I'm not saying is definitely the case, but even if we were in that world, we'd still be alive, there'd still be love to do, there'd still be beautiful things to act on. It wouldn't be the end of the world. And for me, I went through real deep grief about this sense that maybe we're in that place. And I don't mean to, you know, this is a short talk. I mean, this was a process that I went through for a long time. And I'm still going through. And the thing about it is that grief or despair, it doesn't end you. And I've also personally, my fiance passed away a few years ago, and one of my closest friends just a few weeks later. And I've had a lot of personal grief as well. And it doesn't end you. You cry, you sob, you hurt, you rage, you try and bargain with the universe, you do all the things that you do. And then one day you wake up and the grieving isn't taking 100% of all of your energy for the first time. And you think, well, what am I going to do with me? Because I'm still here. And I think if we go through that grieving for the world that we might feel, if we feel it, and if we feel it, it will block us. If we go through that process, then we wake up on the other side of it and we go, what are we going to do? And actually then the energy is completely different. Instead of feeling this overwhelming, I've got to do whatever needs doing, I've got to work myself to the ground, and loads of activists go into burnout because they're just working so hard against this overwhelming odds. Instead, if we've integrated, if we've faced our pain, and we're at peace with it to some extent, it still hurts, but we found a way to live with it, then the question becomes, okay, what story do I want to tell with my life in that world? What story do I want to tell with my life? Maybe there are some things I can't change, and maybe I've faced that. Maybe there are other things I can. But then suddenly the energy of your life is totally different, because every day you just do whatever you most believe in. You're completely selfish. You say, okay, I want to be an activist, I want to deal with that pain, I want to face it, I want to work for things that really inspire me. And there's no longer like 50% of your energy being forced into suppressing pain. Suddenly all of you is saying, I want to do this, and it's great, and it's wonderful, and it's alive. And that's kind of the secret of grief, is that grief brings us alive. And there is a fate worse than death, and the fate worse than death is undeath. You know, the poets and we hear about vampires and zombies. It's that, being kind of alive but having no life in us at all. And that's where it goes if we don't face our fears. That's where we end up, whether it's personal grief, whether it's environmental grief, whether it's anger, pain, whatever it might be. And so that, I think, is the thing that really came through for me in all of this. Maybe we can't change the path of global industrial culture. Maybe we can. If we feel in our soul we absolutely can, we want to work for that, great. But if in our soul we feel like, actually, I've tried that, I've been trying that for decades and it's not working, well then, admit that and do something that does feel really valuable.
Sean, do you mind if I just pick up on something about what you're saying? It kind of sounds like to me, and you might not agree with this, but that in the context of our goals and aims for change, environmental change, that there's a moment where you actually have to let go of a particular outcome, and that letting go of that particular outcome can be very painful, it can be very scary, because you may have invested a huge amount of energy into this particular, how you envisage the outcome of what you're doing. You may see that particular outcome is going to be the solution, and yet there's a point in which you have to surrender in a way that outcome. And it reminds me of at the Global Retreat Centre there's about 35 residents, and we have a business meeting every Tuesday evening, and it kind of also connects with what Paul was saying about coming to a collective agreement about an outcome. And what I've observed, I've been attending these business meetings every Tuesday probably for the last 6 years. And I've watched time and time again the dynamics in the group when a situation is posed, or we need to create something, or we need to make a decision about something. And sometimes what happens is we can spend the entire business meeting, which can last 2 hours or whatever, talking about one tiny point, and you just feel like you're getting nowhere, and everybody has their own opinion, and it takes ages, and the feeling and the energy in the room really drops, because everybody's feeling like we're not getting anywhere. How are we ever going to come to an agreement on this? But what I've noticed is when there is a kind of a surrender of the ultimate outcome, and when the attitude to support takes priority over the ultimate outcome, that's when things suddenly start falling into place, and it's as though people decide, actually, I'm going to support that person's opinion even if I don't agree with it. I don't have to support the ultimate outcome, but I support their intention, I support their contribution as a person, and the attitude of support is very much about love and acceptance and the things we've been talking about. But it happens when the priority is on my attitude of support to whatever is coming up in that discussion, rather than on the way I see the outcome should be. And so, yeah, that just struck me as you were speaking, that perhaps it's quite an outrageous thing to think about, actually, and I need to think about it more myself, but maybe that's something we need to look at. What is this outcome that we are very attached to, and how is that attachment to the outcome getting in the way of me actually doing something that's more useful, or getting in the way of me supporting in a way that is going to be very useful to the cause?
Well, I think when you say that your ultimate intention can get in the way of something that's more useful, then you kind of say it's not really your ultimate intention.
No, sorry, not your intention gets in the way, but your attachment to the outcome.
But that's just it. I think the group maybe. I mean, I think of an example from the Occupy movement. I was quite involved with that in the camp that was outside St Paul's Cathedral. And a lot of people came to that because they wanted to engage with the current system of finance and the kind of corruption and exploitation within that, and grappling with that and the environmental crisis. But one thing we found was that once the camp was there, we found a lot of people coming who were maybe homeless or alcoholics or struggling with drug problems, and they were drawn to the camp because there were a bunch of caring people there, and actually, our society, with benefits cuts and NHS cuts and stuff, is becoming much less welcoming to people who are troubled in different ways. And then there was a real split within the camp, because some people were saying, well, look, our clear objective here is to make these political changes and achieve these environmental aims. And other people in the camp were like, well, no, the reason we're here is to kind of raise consciousness and care and spread these kind of values in the world. And actually one of the most powerful ways we can do that is by supporting and helping these people. And I think it was a sort of lesson in a way for a lot of people in the movement that getting our intentions clear is incredibly important, because we might think we're all here for the same reason. And often, we can work together with different intentions. But if you want to work together as a group and be really solid through challenges, having a really clear intention is it. And maybe if in that group you'd say, well, our overall intention is, this.
I think that the feeling that I have is that the overall intention should be about support and connection and unity. And I know it's so tempting, to say stuff like that too lightly, but I know that when somebody in the group has a fixed idea of how that end result is going to look, that's when the problem comes, because we all want, for example, we all want an event that is successful, or that people feel they enjoyed and stuff like that. but how that event actually looks. When we fixate too much on those things, then it's as though it doesn't leave space for things to flow. Then there's blockages that come, and so I guess the feeling is not to let go of the intention, the deepest intention, but maybe not to be so attached to what that end result is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been through quite a hard lesson myself on this recently, because I spent a lot of the last few years trying to set up a land-based community down in Devon. And that was my plan for where I was going to live long term and what was going to be my livelihood, living and working there. And then my close friend who I'd been working with on it, after we got the planning permission, had a change of heart, decided to move back to Ireland where he's from. And it completely floored me. I was like, but this is my whole future plan. This is what I wanted to contribute to kind of making the world a better place. And it really felt like it expressed a lot of things I wanted to do. Absolutely floored me. I mean, I sort of tried to cling on to it in a way that probably with hindsight I shouldn't have done for so long, and really burned myself out. Really got to a place where I wasn't really sleeping well, and some days even struggling to get out of bed, and was feeling really ineffective, and then eventually just kind of had to let it go, because I realised, I'm not okay here, and I need to step away from this. And also, as I kind of did that and gave myself a bit of space to reflect instead of frantically working to try and salvage this thing, I realised that actually the overall project was still in a really good place to succeed, just without me in the role that I was expecting to be in. And that as I let that go, and reminded myself of the overall intention, that this could actually be a really beautiful thing in the world, but that maybe it wasn't going to be my home, then I've recovered. And I think when you get this stuff wrong, as you say, the flow gets blocked, and you feel that even if you don't understand what's going on, which I really didn't. You can't deny the fact that your body starts telling you, this isn't right, so you're blocked.
I think that's a really powerful example you've just given, and and I guess those moments of pause, I think it was mentioned by Romina in the talk about stepping back, are so crucial, just to kind of reassess where we are at, and of course this applies personally, but also within the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I've found, like, dancing is my favourite thing in life. That's where I feel most alive, and whenever I notice, okay, actually I haven't found time to go dancing for a couple of months, like, I'm like, okay, you're not practicing what you preach here, because there's an amazing line from an American theologian called Howard Thurman, who said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who've come alive. And that is something I feel the truth of much more deeply than I necessarily always manage to apply, which is why it's a real sort of touchstone for me, because I feel like I still have a lot to learn from that line. That's kind of what I would say about that.
So, just taking it back to a practical level again, I mean, I think this afternoon is really sort of bouncing between the very practical, action-orientated things that need to happen, let's say, and then, our own personal journey within that. But on a practical level, you have done some very interesting things, and we don't have time to talk about it all, I don't think, but being a bit of a somebody who enjoys slightly outrageous things, I was very interested about your whole exploration around moneylessness and the gift economy, and I just thought, why not talk a little bit about that?
Okay, well, we've heard that from a couple of people as well. I think Paul was saying we've got a system set up that means we have to consume to stay alive, and I think it was Kieran was saying, we've got to work, because that's necessary for living. And I think that's worth examining, actually. I mean, there's a £10 note here, which is, a piece of paper, right? But I'd invite you to kind of really reflect on what this means to you, this piece of paper. Is it more important to you than this piece of paper that I've scribbled notes on for this talk, or, that piece of paper at the back of the hall, and why are you reflecting on that? I'm just going to do this. And you feel it, right?
Yeah. He did want to burn it, but then we noticed the fire.
And yeah, and then I thought I'd throw it out the window, but then I was thinking about the devil and the angel and the littering, and I thought, that's so I'm just going to tear it up. And yeah, your words would have a tiny piece. Like, obviously, if £10 of value is contained in this piece of paper, then each of these must be like, 50p, so, hang to it. And I think, seriously, like, it's really important how powerful that is. Like, why do we care that much about this piece of paper? Why is there a voice in us going, what is he doing? And you could have given that to charity, you could have given that to someone who's starving, like, why have we created a world where whether someone eats or not is dependent on what I do with this piece of paper? Why have we created a world where it's not okay if I decide, actually, the thing I want to do with this piece of paper, like, I don't want £10 of value of something from the shop. I want to get some people thinking about the stories that underpin money. Like, that's a great thing to do with £10, to my mind. I loved it. It felt good. And that's what I mean, this is not selflessness. It's not like, well, that was my £10 and now I've given it away to movement. And I'm not getting paid for today, I've lost £10, what am I doing here? No, I'm being selfish here, I love that. I love doing that. I love talking about this stuff, I love exploring what's really valuable in life. And, I have a friend who lived for 3 years near Bristol without a penny. Like, he literally gave up money. He didn't have a penny, didn't touch a penny for 3 years, and I don't really have time to go into that very much. But I think it's a very valuable thing to reflect that for the vast majority of human existence, money didn't exist.
And I think it's a brilliant way of showing how our reality is also created by the stories that we tell and the ways in which we think about things, and how when we are all buying into something, we are reinforcing it all the time. And so even just the choice of not buying into something is a way of contributing in quite a powerful way.
Well, I often say we cannot not change the world. Like, if you live the most default, societally endorsed way of life, then you're reinforcing the default society endorsed way of life. You're one of the people who's contributing to making that the majority way of life. And whatever we do changes the world. Don't ever let anyone tell you you can't change the world. You cannot not change the world. Whatever you do will do that. And I think, for me, I want to live a life where I feel fully alive, where I feel like what I'm doing I believe in with all my heart, and I'm happy to talk about it with anyone without any fear of the questions that might come up. And some people talk about public speaking, what if someone asks a question I don't know the answer to? I hope you ask questions I don't know the answer to, because that means I've got something to learn, I've got something that I need to face in myself. And just like some way I want to get to Q&A quite soon, like in terms of the kind of the more practical stuff that we were talking about, and how we engage, is it kind of global action, is it local action, is it reform or revolution? Like, there's a line from my late friend, actually, who mentioned, who died a few years ago, David Fleming, and he said, large-scale problems like climate change, like environmental crisis, do not require large-scale solutions. They require small-scale solutions within a large-scale framework. And Paul's been talking about the essential nature of that framework. And if you're called to work for that framework, I do a lot of work on a carbon rationing scheme called tradable energy quotas, and I work with governments on that, and I'm called in part to working on those frameworks at the global level, but also to the local level and the small-scale options, which are actually the solution. If we ever had an adequate global carbon agreement, and there are great people working for that right now, and hopefully they'll get there, it would be useless if people didn't change their lifestyles. It's really easy to say, well, it's Exxon or Shell's fault, but actually they're just supplying the energy that we demand with our lifestyles, and those are going to have to change if we're going to have a solution. So I would say, engage with those things that make you come alive, and the things that will make the world a better place, regardless of the future scenario, regardless of whether you feel hopeful or hopeless about where the big picture's going. You can make the world more beautiful in tiny ways and in big ways, and do the things that feel worthy no matter where the future goes, and you won't go far wrong.
I believe it's time for some questions, if you have any. Maybe many.
Awesome, all on. Off we go to change the world then.
It was just a question of interest really. The colleague you referred to who lived on nothing for a certain amount of time, because between me and my friend, you try to sort of reduce your consumption, but as Paul was saying, you're in an environment where that's sort of necessary to an extent. So just wondering some ideas about how he managed to do that, which could help us to reduce perhaps.
I love calling someone living without money your colleague. That's brilliant. It's like, yeah, we go to the Moneyless office and we sit down together. Well, he's written a couple of books actually. He wrote a book called The Moneyless Man, which was about his initial. He lived free. He thought, what I'll do. He thought, everyone I know who's doing something I don't believe in, they're pretty much doing it for money. So being that kind of guy, he thought, okay, I'll live for a year without money. I'm gonna write a book about it. And that's what he did. And he wrote The Moneyless Man, and it's a really enjoyable read. And then he actually thought, I've never been happier, and he carried on living without money after that. And did it for 3 years in the end, and I won't get into why he stopped. That's a very interesting and long story. But he also last year wrote a book which I edited actually called the Moneyless Manifesto, which is the Moneyless Man is about his personal journey of doing that for a year down near Bristol. And the Moneyless Manifesto is much more how people can apply that in their own lives, not necessarily all the way to zero, but like reducing their personal reliance on money and freeing themselves up more. I mean, I personally, for the last 8 years or so, have lived on about £4,000 a year. And that means I don't have to spend my time working for money. I can spend my time working for things I care about. So yeah, I'd really recommend those books. They're brilliant.
Thank you. We've got one more.
I just noticed where you rip up the money and things. Is that the same for the electronic money, or do you see differently?
What, you mean, should we tear up electronic money? We need hackers for that.
Well, I know we cannot tear it up. You must have an account, you must have some money in your bank, so...
Well, as I say, I have money in my life. I spend about £4,000 a year, and it's in a bank account. Mark didn't have a bank account when he lived with that money. He didn't use or spend a penny of any kind of money. I think, well, I mean, I could talk for hours about money and what it is and what it means, and I'll be delighted to talk to some of you afterwards.
The way the world sees success is like how much money you accumulate in your life, and without money, if you didn't have the money to build this place, then we would be sitting right comfortably here.
Well, this is the thing, was it money that built this place? Or was it people and materials that built this place? Because humans existed without money for the vast majority of our existence, and we still built things, and we still had babies, and we still had beautiful lives, and we still had respect and love, and had people who were massively respected and looked up to. Now, anthropologists call that the gift economy, the economy without money. And what we've seen over particularly the last few hundred years, and the total story of money is about 5,000 years old, no, about 3,000 years old. And what we've seen is that the monetary economy has expanded further and further, but it's still not, I would argue, the economy on which our society is based. Your family didn't raise you because you paid them to. If your mum comes over for dinner, you don't charge her for it. And there's a story about a kid who was presented with a bill on his 18th birthday by his parents saying, this is how much it costs us to raise you, now you go off to work and pay us back, right? So even the monetary economy is even trying to extend into these realms, but it's still the gift economy that we're based on. And like when Mark lived without money, and other people have done it, he found that actually as soon as people knew he had no money, they instantly defaulted back to the gift economy, and they cared about him, and they wanted to help him, and they wanted to, offer him a lift, or take him to whatever it was. And don't forget that, without the gift economy, the monetary economy would collapse like that. Look at nature. We don't pay the bees to fertilise our crops. We don't pay the wind to move the seeds around. It's just given freely, and that's how human culture used to be. And so I think the more that we bring the gift economy into our lives and push the monetary economy back, the more beautiful life becomes.
You give when you have it.
Yeah, but I'm not giving money. I have a lot to give. I didn't give you any money today, but I've tried to give by giving this talk. And there are different kinds of things you can give, and some you can only give if you have, and then you don't have them anymore. Some you give, like love, and then you have more. And that's the kind of economy I want to live in. And there's a lovely example, someone said to me, it's like commas, because I'm a writer. Commas, he said, there's no scarcity of commas. Use as many as you want, they're not going to run out. I can have a comma between every word, I can do it completely completely freely. So we're taught at the moment in our schools that, you know, economies are based on scarcity and they're based on a zero-sum game, and if someone else has got something, then you haven't got it. Like, that's one kind of economics. But if we read the economic section of a paper, we think, well, you know, or the finance section, we think that's about money. But actually, economics isn't about money. Economics is about how we meet our needs. Money is one way of doing it. It's not the only way. It's just the way that we're taught to think is the only way of doing it. So, you know, build beautiful places, do beautiful things with your life, but you don't have to be paid for it necessarily. And I'm not, on the whole.
Thank you so much on that note. Just a round of applause for Gavin and Sean.
Thank you. Thank you, Naveen, for that introduction. It was wonderful to be here. I just found out that me and Naveen and Romina have some common friends that I went to university with, so it's good to make that connection. One difficulty of speaking so late in the day is that a lot of the things I wanted to talk about have already been spoken. So I apologize if I'm repeating things that you've already heard. And I apologize also for reading from paper, because I know that's the worst thing when giving a presentation. But there are certain things I wanted to say. But just to tell you what I do, I'm based at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, where I run a program called the Bhumi Project, which was started by the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, which is a charity that was started by Prince Philip in 1995. And what our organisation does is work with the Hindu community internationally, but primarily in India, to raise awareness about climate change and environmental concerns from a Hindu perspective, or from the perspective of what traditional sacred texts from India say about the environment. And my colleagues work on similar projects with the international Christian community, Jewish community, Muslim community, and 11 other major faiths across the world. So yeah, I do say, I apologize for reading from paper, but I really wanted to say a few things. And I want to start by saying, I want to say something a little bit controversial, and I think that the environmental crisis that we're finding in the world today is not really the biggest challenge that we're facing. I want to suggest that maybe there's something a little bit more fundamental, structurally different, or structurally wrong and difficult in the world that we need to address, and I would call that problem a crisis of the heart. I would say the environmental problem is a manifestation of something that's lacking collectively in human society. If you look at the world, you know, climate change, war, famine, things like that, if we try to examine where they're coming from, one can say that they're coming from greed, from exploitation. And Romina spoke about that earlier, a hole in the heart. And we can't fill that hole, so we go out and we take advantage of other people or other things or natural resources. So I think as a global community, we've kind of lost our way a little bit. We don't really know what to do anymore. As Sean was saying, you know, we think money is the answer, right? But it really isn't. It really isn't, and I don't need to hammer that point because I think we're all in agreement of that. So if we're trying to solve environmental problems through technology, I really don't think that's going to fix the problem, because I think it's only going to be a stopgap. If greed, if exploitation, if the desire to use other people, use other things exists in the world, we can fix one problem, we can fix the environment, but we're only going to cause another problem, and then we're going to fix that problem, then we're going to cause another problem, and we're going to fix that problem. That's why I say it's a structural problem in civilization today. Mahatma Gandhi, when he once came to England, they asked him, what do you think of Western civilization? And he joked and he said, I think it's a good idea. We think we're civilized, but one of the greatest leaders in the world questioned that, and I think we should all question how civilized we think we are. So one of my jobs at the Bhumi Project is to connect the dots, connect Hindu or Vedic teachings to current environmental concerns. And some of you may know these teachings already, such as the concept of dharma. Dharma actually means to sustain. That's actually what the translation is. The concept of ahimsa, where we live a life where we try to minimize or eliminate violence. One of my environmental heroes is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Who's heard of Emerson? Show of hands, a few Emerson fans in the room. Good, good. For those of you who don't know who Emerson was, he lived in the 1800s in a town just outside of Boston, in a town called Concord, Massachusetts. And he and a group of friends, they were called the Transcendentalists, or the Boston Brahmins. And they read a lot of sacred texts from India. Now in 1836, Emerson wrote his most famous book, and actually it was his first major publication. It was an essay called Nature. And he published it without the author's name, so he just distributed it around Concord and Boston. And he says something in here which is fantastic. It's an amazing essay on nature. And he says something in there which was very profound when I first read it a few years ago. He said, the problem of restoring to the world original and eternal beauty is solved by the redemption of the soul. The ruin or the blank that we see when we look in nature is in our own eye. He goes on to say, the reason why the world lacks unity and lies broken in heaps is because man is disunited with himself. He cannot be a naturalist until he satisfies all the demands of the spirit. When I read that, I was kind of blown away. He's saying that to restore beauty to the world, we first have to be united internally and to connect with that spirit which exists within all of us. And I think that's something that's really been shared by a lot of people today. My own spiritual teacher used to say, purity is the force. What he meant by that was if you wanted to do good in the world, you first had to be good. If I still harbour destructive and horrible tendencies within my own heart, how can I hope to eradicate those in the hearts of others and in the world? If I have an addiction, I can't stop someone else from being addicted to something as well. I need to work on myself. So therefore, that's why I'm suggesting, and just echoing what a lot of people have said, in order to make a change in the world, we really do have to work on ourselves and find something in ourselves that connects to something deeper. So the question naturally arises, how do we start or make that internal change and transformation? How do we do it? The question was asked. There's so many different ways. Right? Some people like to be religious, some people like to be spiritual, some people like to go to self-help courses or practice meditation or self-development or go to the Global Retreat Center. There are a number of things we can all do. And I think we all have to find something that connects and resonates with us and something that we can always return to. And we can always say, well, this is why this is what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. Because this is the one thing that inspires me throughout all difficulties. I want to share with you one experiment that someone conducted many years ago, and I'm pretty sure that some of you may have heard of this experiment. The experiment was conducted by a gentleman of the name of Henry David Thoreau. Who knows the experiment that I'm going to talk about? A couple of you. Henry David Thoreau was a contemporary of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he also lived in Concord, and he was also one of the transcendentalists. But he was also younger than Emerson, and he looked at Emerson almost like as a guru or as a mentor. In 1854, Emerson embarked on a radical experiment. He, and later it was published in a book. And I'll just read you the opening lines of the book to give you a sense of what that experiment was. He says in the book, "When I wrote the following pages, or rather the bulk of them, I lived alone in the woods, a mile from any neighbour, in a house which I built myself, on the shore of Walden Pond, in Concord, Massachusetts, and earned my living by the labour of my hands only. I lived there for 2 years and 2 months. Basically, Thoreau decided he was going to leave society, build a one-room log cabin with his own hands next to a pond. Actually, it wasn't a pond, it's a massive lake if you've ever seen it, but they call it a pond. And not have any money, and live by the work of his own hands. He did this for 2 years and wrote this book called Walden. And the book is amazing because it shares so many lessons about how to live life with simplicity. And this is the common thread throughout the book. In fact, one of Thoreau's famous mantras is simplify, simplify, simplify. That's all he wanted to do when he was living there. How can I simplify my life as much as possible? I want to share with you one lesson that he shares with us in the book. It's one of my favourite parts. He talks about vegetarianism, or the need to remove animal food from his diet. In the chapter entitled Higher Laws, he says that he wanted to give up animal food because he found it unclean. And I'll just read what he says. "When I had caught and cleaned and cooked and eaten my fish, they seemed not to have fed me essentially. It was insignificant and unnecessary, and cost more than it came to. A little bread or a few potatoes would have done just as well, with less trouble and filth. Like many of my contemporaries, I had rarely for many years used animal food or tea or coffee. Not so much because of any ill effects, which I traced to them, as because they were not agreeable to my imagination. The repugnance to animal food is not the effect of experience, but it is an instinct. I believe that every man who has ever been earnest to preserve his higher or poetic faculties in the best condition has been particularly inclined to abstain from animal food. I found that quite profound when I read that. Just one lesson that Thoreau learned whilst living at Walden Pond. Now, at the time of publication, Walden, the book, wasn't well received. In fact, Thoreau didn't make much money out of it, and he spent 7 years after living at Walden to write the book, published it, didn't really make much impact. But now, it's one of the books that a lot of people go to. And in fact, his later works, he wrote one book on civil disobedience, because he was very active in the anti-slave movement in America, influenced Gandhi, and it influenced Martin Luther King as well. So Thoreau was immensely influential. But what about connecting these dots? I said part of my work is connecting the dots. How does Hindu thought, Emerson and Thoreau, how are they connected? And they're connected by one thing, which is the sacred text from India, which is known as the Bhagavad Gita. When Emerson came to London in 1833, he picked up the first ever English translation of the Gita, which was translated by Charles Wilkins. He then went back to America and shared it with his colleagues in the Transcendental movement, and it became one of the most essential texts that they were reading and studying. And then when Thoreau went to Walden, the Gita was one of the few books he took with him, and he studied it extensively during his time there. So Emerson and Thoreau, they found their kind of inspiration, their reason for their lives, for what they were teaching, for what they were studying, for what they were sharing in, by and large, texts and teachings from sacred traditions. I thought that was amazing. When I went to Walden Pond 3 years ago, it was a pilgrimage for me to see where Thoreau lived, to see where the first ever English translation of this text had been read and studied. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. Just want to finish by saying one thing. I think I would suggest that if we're serious about affecting a positive change in the world, that we embark on a radical journey of self-awakening and discovery. More than technology, more than treaties, more than policies, more than these big climate change meetings that are happening every year, we really need to connect with ourselves. And I think in the words of Emerson, we need people in the world who are united within themselves and united with their inner spirits. And I think that's really going to be the thing that's going to change things in the world. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and I've very much enjoyed dipping in and out of the programme and hearing, well, quite a few chunks of what has been shared, and very profound ideas. You could call them new, but I actually think they're very, very ancient. They're based on principles that have been around for antiquity, and it's just that we've lost sight of them. I love the whole thing about the gift economy, and you asked the question, who built this house? And yes, of course, well, God came down, just manifested. It was almost like that, I have to say. But yes, of course, it took money, it had to be paid for. But you're quite right, we didn't start up a business to make money so that we could build the house. We didn't even go out fundraising. It really was what came from everybody's heart. And somebody who many of you know, who is the head of the organisation, Dali Janki, I think quite a few of you know of her or know her. She's a woman of incredible vision. And something that I was reading from her, she's in India now, she was saying that when you really work as an instrument for a higher power, then things which you could never have thought were possible, or things which you could never have thought of, become possible. So it's not just that you think of something and say, well, maybe, it couldn't even arise in your mind, but it happens. And she had that incredible vision, and I will tell you that this house, well, there's the two houses, cost several million to build, obviously. And at one point when we were building the first house, which is now 1991, 23 years ago, the trustees, we're a charity, we have trustees, they told Daddy, you must arrange a loan at the bank. And she said, but my honour, we never take loans, no, you must do it. So, okay, we arranged a loan for a certain amount, but never used a penny of it. So she was sure that if there's the right intention, if there's goodwill, if there's a deep unconditional love for that which you're doing, for the task that you're engaged in, then definitely you're going to attract towards you the resources that you need. And this is the kind of principles that some of you have been sharing. It's not that you have to strive to make something happen. Things come to you if the intention is pure. And by that I mean that there's nothing selfish. It's a very pure intention to serve the community, to serve the world. And yes, you were mentioning how, so often we think of economy, everything in terms of lack. I think in America they call it the deficit discourse, And we don't only do that in terms of society and our lives and resources, in terms of what we don't have, we're always looking at what we want, and absolutely the whole advertising machine of the consumer society is set up to always make sure we remain dissatisfied, so that we always want something else. And it's a big manipulation, huge manipulation. But I think we also do that in terms of ourselves. We don't realise the capacity that we have within our own selves for change. And you mentioned this. We are all in the process of changing the world, and even what we don't do is going to have an outcome. We're all responsible. And we have this, discourse inside often of weak thoughts. This is not possible. Why me? How? I won't be able to do it. Who am I? There's a nice little phrase that if you ever think that you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. How tiny is a mosquito? I'm sure you've all had that experience, I have. It's possible to be an agent of change. And it's very important to understand how change happens, and these are the things that have been talked about today. It's actually a flow. It's a flow from the inner to the outer. In terms of the environment, it's very interesting to understand not only what we need to do in terms of the use of resources and, our lifestyle and a vegetarian diet and everything. And you're probably aware, most of you, that the human gut is actually much more suited to processing vegetarian food than meat. Meat actually putrefies in the system, and so it's not healthy. It's not just about, doing things practically. It is about that, but it's also about understanding the influence that our very thoughts and our very consciousness has on matter, on the elements of nature. And we've been participating in the climate change conferences now over a few years, and the particular perspective we've been bringing, one is about values, because without those more altruistic spiritual values, you won't be able to do the action actions that will bring about lasting change. Another is about resilience, because you need to be strong to go against the tide. That was being shared in the panel, you know, when everybody's going in one direction and you understand it's not the right direction and you want to go in another direction. You need a lot of inner strength, and you need the support of like-minded people, definitely. But the other perspective is of this thing of the interaction between consciousness and matter, the environment. And we talk about in the papers a confluence of two living systems. I don't think this has come up, has it? And so the Earth is a living system. It's breathing. There's a pattern to life. It's living. Things grow. Things interact. And we are a living system. We have thoughts and feelings and ideas. It's two living systems that are working together, and one affects the other. And David Bohm, who's a scientist, not here anymore, but in another form, he said that something to the effect that we don't realize that the effect that the one who is observing has upon the observed. You know, in other words, we all look at something, we all see what's happening in the world, but the way we see it, what we bring to it, our own attitudes, our own feelings, our own ideals, actually affect what we see. And so we're all seeing something different. We're all seeing according to who we are, rather than truly objectively what's out there. And he said, you know, we didn't realize the effect that our minds have upon the external world. All the time we thought the mind was just giving a commentary, but it's not. It's actually moulding and affecting the world out there. And that's something that's very important to understand. It's not just about our actions, but it's about what's really happening within the human being. And so then I say to myself, you know, I have to nurture what's within. I have to nurture myself in a way that truly only that goodness is manifesting in me and driving me. What is driving us? You know, are there, you know, we all have, none of us are perfect. Well, I don't know. Anybody here perfect? Please own up if you are. No? Oh, okay. But you know, we're all struggling with this to some degree, aren't we? We know when there are things that have come up where we feel, you know, affected by what people say, things that happen, our emotions go up and down, right? Who doesn't have a fluctuation of emotions and feelings? We all do. Not too much even, okay? But you know, there's this sort of give and take that goes on. Things from the outside impinge on me, I'm impinging on the things outside of myself. It's important to turn this around so that I'm very consciously being driven by my inner goodness, the inner capacity I have for love, the inner capacity I have for peace, the inner capacity I have for wisdom. It's so important to take care of your inner self. Physically, we want to take care of ourselves and stay well and eat well. But if you don't take care of your inner self, it'll be difficult even to do that. I think it was coming up about depression and moods and things and a lack of motivation. And so that's where it's so important to spend time with the self, to nurture good thoughts, nurture good attitudes, and have the faith that that is what is going to create something better in the world. And it won't just be faith in theory, you will actually begin to see it happen. And the things that you couldn't have thought of will begin to happen for you. And you'll say, well, this is the miracle of a pure heart, pure intention. And even you'd say, this is the miracle of the wisdom of God that also works through us. And so that's what I'd really like to leave you with. This awareness of the interaction of the inner and outer that is so crucial to understand our responsibility, and I'm talking to myself as much as to anybody else in the room, and to take care of myself in a very, very conscious way. And so, thank you for listening. And Om Shanti, a greeting we use in this house a lot. It just tells us about who we are. Om Shanti, I am a being of peace. Thank you.
I've actually found the experience a different experience, as if I'm entering a new age or a new lease of life. That's the way I found it today.
It's very good, yes. I thought everybody had very good things to say, and it was really interesting, and I think I have to go back and reflect on everything as well. But I definitely learned something, and I can definitely take something back with me, definitely.
It was great. Firstly, I want to thank everybody for sharing really great information. It helps me to reflect on my own beliefs. I think whatever I learn, I'm quite ready to apply in my practical life. I think the key what I learned was to have study every day, meditate every day, spend the time in a silence, because I work in quite a corporate world. Even people are totally different from what I think, but I can see them as a family. I can accept them where they are. So for me, regular spiritual study, I think, is a key, and reflecting every day on your actions.
It was amazing. I really enjoyed all the different speakers. I learned a lot, and there are loads of things to think about now that maybe I wouldn't have thought about before. But I think I've regained my passion for the environment, and I'm going to try and incorporate it into my life in my own way, and read more books about it, just get more involved.
My experience was really positive. It's always nice to come to these events and meet like-minded people, and for me the topic was really relevant, and it just kind of touched base again, reminded me of the importance of certain things I was already aware of, but it was also really good to hear from different speakers, different points of view on how we can improve the environment, and I just think what I'll take away is about the things that I need to look at inside me first of all, and then make those changes externally. But whatever changes I can make will make a difference, even if they're small. So just encouraged me with that, really. So I'll definitely come to another Brahma Kumaris workshop.